Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm Eugene Delgaudio, President of Public Advocate. I'm grateful to the supporters who have been by me, to the millions of people watching our videos. Thank you for watching our videos. This is a very serious video. We have a national celebrity, a conservative activist of the First Order with us today. Chloe Cole has demonstrated to young people, to old people, and people my age, of course, because I'm a young 67, that you need to get out, you need to speak to people, and you need to stand your ground. And Chloe has been doing that. I want to say Chloe is on Twitter. Her account on Twitter with 172,000 followers. Congratulations. Is CHOOO Cole. That's Chew Cole at Chew Cole, CHOOO Cole, COLE, with 172,000 follows. She's no lightweight. As you know, as president of Public Advocate, I have been very much communicating on a massive level to oppose the transgender lobby, to oppose the homosexual lobby for 40 years. In my 40 years, I have seldom found young people as devoted, dedicated, and capable as Chloe is at her young age. I started when I was 14 years old myself, so I know what it's like to have to face a world full of interesting people who have different opinions as a young teenager. It's not easy for her. I would like to give a little background on Chloe before I start asking questions of her. This is an interview. Chloe's from California. She has a Wikipedia page that most Washington figures do not have, as detailed an account of her life since she was born and how she became a transitioning victim at 12 years old. She had an operation, a mastectomy, at age 15 in June of 2020. I'm reading from the Wikipedia page. I'm going to skip to the Washington scene. The Washington scene, you spoke at a press conference organized by Wonder Woman, the Republican Congresswoman and anti-trans activist Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we call Wonder Woman here in this office, as you know. She was helping Marjorie Taylor Greene, pass the Project Protect Children's Innocence Act. The Protect Children's Innocence Act is something we've collected over 120,000 petitions and presented them to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And it caused quite a stir, since we are one of the few groups that is still functioning online, in the mail, and in person. We bring these petitions to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so she's our hero. And you appeared at a news conference to support legislation that we are supporting here in this office. So we want to give you a shout out. You being a celebrity and working with Marjorie Taylor Greene is a good thing as far as we're concerned. Chloe Cole has also been among the speakers at a rally to end child mutilation hosted by Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is another one of our heroes. He went all the way to Nashville and spoke there. Of course, we promote his videos. He is famous for his What is a Woman video, which we have promoted on our social websites as well. I do want to give a little background on us in a minute, but I also want to salute you for your lawsuit. On November 9th, 2022, Miss Chloe Cole, filed a 90-day notice of intent to sue against the healthcare company Kaiser Permanente, along with the individual endocrinologist, the psychiatrist, and plastic surgeon involved in her, quote, treatment. And good luck with that lawsuit. I'm not going to ask you about that. I don't think I have questions about that. But I'm not going to ask you to give your legal opinion. But we're going to obviously discuss that wrongful treatment of you in general terms, not related to that lawsuit. So about our organization, Public Advocate, we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c4. We have been around for 40 years. I was brought in from New York to run the organization. It's a nonprofit. We're scraping by, but we're not without resources. On the internet, we have reached over 50 million people this year with our limited resources, and we're hopeful to close the year with 100 million views on our various videos. We sometimes use some humor, like I mentioned, Wonder Woman. You know, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not really Wonder Woman, but we had a volunteer dressed up as Wonder Woman, and it caused the left great anxiety to have someone dressed up as Wonder Woman, and we, parading around Capitol Hill. And we have several social media posts that emphasize her being our hero, singing, songs, music, the whole 9 yards. And we just posted something with Dr. Evil yesterday. We have a song with Dr. Evil, and he's talking about the brainwashing and the thought control that Governor Whitmer in Michigan wants to employ with her gender. You know, the proper phraseology is to misidentify someone. So we're mocking Governor Whitmer in this social media post yesterday. So we'll go to if you're ready. Are you ready for our first question? Okay, thank you. When did you first start to think you were trans?
I mean, before I really started to question my own gender, throughout a lot of my childhood, I had been kind of a tomboy, and I gravitated a little bit more towards like my dad, my older brothers, my boy cousins. After a certain point in my childhood, I really started to reject wearing things like dresses, jewelry, pink, and things that were stereotypically feminine. And I started puberty at a pretty young age. I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And so I was kind of being thrust towards adulthood, womanhood, earlier than I had expected. And I looked at womanhood as something undesirable, something that made me weak and small and insignificant. But I wasn't really introduced to the idea that I could opt out of it until I was around like 11 or 12 years old, when I started to use social media after I got my first phone. And I started to believe that I was a boy after learning about things like gender identity through posts that were focused on like the LGBT community.
Were there any authority figures, parents, teachers, counselors, social workers who introduced the idea to you or encouraged it? You said, because in your Wikipedia, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but it says you were considered yourself at age 12. So in that period of time, was the idea introduced to you by peers, or did your school play a role?
I learned about it entirely through social media. I didn't know anybody else in person who identified as trans up until around maybe like my sophomore year of high school. But I never even learned about sexuality or identity in any classes I took ever. And I graduated high school just last year in a public school in the middle of California, so that might be kind of shocking to hear, but the influence was totally from social media, and that was strong enough.
So nobody, you're totally social media. Right. How did you get to the point from, let's say you're considered yourself trans, how did you get to, did anyone question your trans identity? Did anyone encourage you to rethink it, suggest that you might be other issues involved, like the tomboy type of thing?
Well, when I first started to socially transition, I was in about 7th or 8th grade, and I was just doing simple things like cutting off my hair, wearing more boys' clothing and such, and trying to act more like the boys in my grade. And that alone made some people at school start to start treating me differently. They started to bully me even just because I was presenting myself in a different way. And I didn't really come out to most people at school about my identity. A very select few people who I trusted, I told them about it, and most of them actually had a pretty negative reaction. But I feel like this, in a way, it sort of reinforced my desire to transition, because I wanted to prove them wrong. But my family, when I came out to them, initially they were pretty supportive. And my parents, they accommodated me. They um, tried to accommodate me by referring to me by my preferred name and as a boy and as their son, because they wanted to make me feel comfortable. And even so, they were pretty concerned about where this is coming from. My dad immediately saw right away that this probably had to do with the mental health issues and struggles in my life that I was facing beforehand. Not only with being a tomboy and hitting puberty at a young age, but also because at school I kind of had some issues with staying focused and with fitting in with my peers, and I had been bullied throughout a lot of elementary school. But
Were you
when even though they're trying to be supportive of me, they were very wary of the fact that I was starting to push more and more towards going through with medically transition as opposed to just going through social transition and living without any medical intervention. And they started to get pretty worried about this. When I first came out to them, they started sending me to a therapist, and to the both of us, it seemed as though nothing was really happening in therapy. I mean, nothing that I was really going through at home or school was really being addressed, and I was really starting to get frustrated. And once I started telling my parents that I wanted to start going on hormones, they decided that they would bring up their concerns with my psychologists and my gender specialists. And upon doing so, their concerns were pretty much immediately shot down. They were told that, well, there's a reason that she's pushing for this so hard. She may be young, but she knows what she wants, and this is going to benefit her. Um, it's not likely that she's going to regret these treatments. In fact, it's more likely that she's going to regret going through puberty and having to deal with her dysphoria. And if you don't affirm her in her decision to transition, then she's probably going to commit suicide. She probably will become suicidal, which
so
wasn't
the
true because at the
therapist,
time I wasn't suicidal
your
up
family
until I started these
therapist
treatments.
wanted to prevent you from becoming suicidal before you even became suicidal.
Right. I mean, at the time, I was a pretty happy kid, actually. I was starting to make some friends, and even though I still was struggling with being bullied, um, I mean, I still got through the day. Um, I was pretty happy where I was at mostly, um, and I was starting to really branch out and develop my interests.
So
And
your parents
overall, I
were
was a pretty well functioning kid.
your parents were supportive, but they wanted to make sure that this is something that should be done, not if you wanted it or not, but they went to the authorities, they went to the medical people, and the medical people green lighted without any evidence. They said, no, this is what she wants. You got to give her what she wants, and didn't look at the independent standard. Is this in your interest?
Right. I mean, the entire premise of my treatment was based on what I wanted and not what I needed. They were focusing on what I, as a child, wanted. I mean, what good is a parent if all you're supposed to give them is what your kid wants, right?
Right.
But they wanted to make sure that I would just be allowed to be a kid and not have to go through any of these permanent interventions and make these decisions at the age that I was, because I was barely 12 going on 13, and kids at that age are notorious for being irresponsible and not really doing things that are in their best interests. And they were pretty much emotionally manipulated. They couldn't bear the thought of me dying because they're my mom and dad. They loved me and they wanted to look out for me.
Chloe, did you have, that was a psychologist, did you have a medical doctor involved with this? Did your parents involve the medical doctor and say, here's what the highs and the lows are? I mean, what happened with the medical doctor?
Well, my family pediatrician was overall pretty uninvolved in the course of my transition, but after that appointment, um, I was referred by a gender specialist to an endocrinologist to try and get me prescription for hormones. And that first endocrinologist who I saw actually pushed back. He said no because he was concerned about my age, about any potential ramifications that these medications might have on my physical and cognitive development. But we were very quickly referred to another endocrinologist afterward, and we never really heard about those concerns ever again.
Were you 11 years old at the time?
I was 13.
13. Okay, so you were past that point because it said 12 in Wikipedia. So you were 13, and they were green lighting it and changing the medical doctor to someone who would facilitate and prescribe the what do they call it? Puberty blockers?
The puberty blockers and the testosterone. I was taking 2 medications.
And so that's 13. Were they the only medical treatments at age 13? Just the puberty blockers and the and what else? The testosterone?
Yes.
Okay, so you were getting those. Were there any other medical prescriptions or medical treatment at age 13?
Well, after a year or two of being on it, my endocrinologist warned me that as a consequence of the lack of estrogen in my body, I would start to experience the atrophy of certain reproductive organs, namely my vagina. And I was just told that I could just treat it using topical estrogen. And so I did that after about a year and a half of being on testosterone, I think. So I was on 3 medications during that time.
They
the
added
blockers, which I stopped
estrogen
after.
because you were destroying estrogen.
Yes.
I see. Did they tell you there are consequences? Obviously, you found out about the estrogen. Were there other consequences to the medications that you were taking that they told you about? Estrogen, testosterone, puberty blocks. Did anybody tell you at that time, age 13, what those things do to you?
Yeah, I mean, before I went on all these medications, during the consultations for them, I was given consent forms with all the with some of the potential side effects on them. It wasn't like a comprehensive list though. Most of the complications that I experienced were on all of these treatments, and even to this day, were not listed. And I didn't know that they were a possibility. But
Well,
even at the age that I was,
some of the descriptions are like 10 pages long sometimes on these medications. I mean, so didn't the when you got the bottle or you got the box or whatever it is, wasn't there any inserts in there that looked like something you should read? I mean, because sometimes it's a book that they put in with the prescriptions.
yeah, I mean, there was like a list on the consent forms.
Okay.
Of a few of them, and in the box there probably was like papers with a more comprehensive list, but I can't remember.
No,
I'd have to look at some of my old vials.
Well, I mean,
But
usually it's a doctor or the professional that will go over that with you and tell you.
Yeah.
Like 10 pages of stuff here.
And she did. My endocrinologist did, but it's a lot to expect of a 13-year-old to understand what things like potentially permanently losing your ability to have children in the future and what atrophy of your reproductive organs means. Because at the time I thought, like, I mean, I wasn't sexually active, of course. I was 13. I didn't even have a boyfriend yet. And I wasn't thinking about having kids of my own because I was still growing up myself.
I'm the father of 6 kids, 2 boys, 4 girls. They're all grown up now. My baby is 27 years old. It's my baby. We had to go through this with everybody, you know, at the respective ages. I have to admit, I was involved in every aspect of their lives, and they were all well-adjusted children that are no longer children. But this is terrible, what was done to you. This is terrible that people would treat you this way and victimize you. I'm going over it because it is something that America needs to hear, that you were basically put in this situation where no adult would want to go without some careful consideration, let alone the age you were, 13. And I think I've covered everything in my preliminary. I would like to say, looking back at this period, but we didn't even get into the operation. We didn't even get into that. But we're just talking about the medication.
Right.
The operation is a whole nother matter. Was that when you were 14?
I was 15. It was a summer just after my sophomore year had ended. And I started consulting a surgeon about halfway through my sophomore year. And my reasons at the time for getting a mastectomy were, I mean, obviously, I was in the mindset of being a boy. I really thought of myself as no different than the other boys my age. And I wanted to look like them. And while I was on the hormones, I passed pretty well as the opposite sex, actually. I pretty much looked like any other boy my age, other than maybe I was a few inches shorter, but I was just a sophomore in high school, so that wasn't too out of the ordinary. But I wanted to be able to take off my shirt just like them and not have to worry about the appearance of my breasts. I'd also been using a binder, which a binder is basically like a compression device, kind of in the shape of like a tank top or a sports bra. And in the chest area of the garment, it has like compression fabric, and it's designed to flatten the appearance of the breasts in males who have gynecomastia or overgrown breast tissue, or women who cross-dress or want to transition to the opposite sex. And I would wear this garment every day that I went to school or went out, whenever I'd have guests over at home, whenever I would work out or go swimming, because I didn't want to be seen with visible breasts. And it was, even though it fit well, it was rather uncomfortable. And I mean, I live right in the middle of California, where it gets up to maybe like 150-degree weather. And I wanted to be free of it. I didn't realize it at the time, but I also had a sexual trauma that kind of factored into my my decision to get a mastectomy and my distaste towards my breasts. And that was from having been sexually assaulted in my 8th grade year by a boy who had been bullying me. And when I initially went through the operation, when I woke up, I was in the initial weeks afterward, I was pretty happy. I was pretty satisfied, and I was excited to, once I was fully healed from the surgery, to be able to take my shirt off and look like any other boy and not have to worry about my breasts anymore. But it didn't quite happen like that. The healing is still ongoing, and I've got open wounds on my chest right now that I have to bandage every day. And even before the complications started to arise, I slowly came to realize that there were some things about being a woman that I missed, like the social elements of being female, like feeling like I was able to be vulnerable with other people, with other women, like I could talk about my personal struggles openly, and just being able to have long hair or wear makeup or wear feminine clothing like skirts. And then towards the end of my junior year, at the end of my psychology course, I was learning about things like the psychology that goes into parenting and motherhood, and the psychological development of a child or an adolescent. It made me realize just how special all of those things were, and the fact that I wanted to pursue motherhood as an adult. And well, I won't be able to breastfeed. I won't even have the choice. I will never know what that's even like, because the opportunity was taken away from me before I even became an adult. And well, after being on testosterone for so many years and having my puberty suppressed, well, there's a chance that I might not be able to naturally have children of my own. And that was a terrifying realization. And I couldn't bear to continue transitioning, because that was when I realized that it was taking more away from me than it ever gave me.
And that was after the mastectomy, after the operation. You
It
got
was
the
about a year afterward, yeah.
a year afterwards. So you were 14, 15.
I was 16
You were now
when I
16.
when I realized.
And obviously, you know now the consequences that you were not informed of. And no one ever brought those consequences to you. I mean, the medical business, I understand that the doctors were telling you that, but it wasn't like with your informed consent. Now, informed consent, the two words, meaning you needed to understand what it was to give you the consent. In other words, for you to give consent, you have to have information. Okay, fine. But to comprehend it as an adult, I have to tell you, people have to give me stuff. I have to have it in writing. I've got to have, your Twitter page. I've got to look at that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into understanding your devotion to a cause. But when you're given a contract, when you're given an agreement, when you're giving consent, there has to be awareness of what the implications, what the ramifications are. And you have actually explained how you became aware of the trouble you were heading into. And
Right.
no one had ever told you what the trouble was in ways that you could appreciate, understand, and as obviously a 15-year-old, and now you're much older, uh, um, how do you feel now when the pro-trans mob claims that these medically mutilating surgeries are not being performed on children? They're saying, oh, this is not happening the way we're discussing it here, the way you're discussing it, the way you're bluntly saying, I got mutilated and I shouldn't have been mutilated. You've said that, and I'm appreciative of that. But the other side of this is they're claiming that this is not happening. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting how their argument progresses from, well, obviously this isn't happening to kids, to, well, yeah, it is happening, but when it happens, it's a good thing. Because I've seen firsthand that this does, in fact, happen to children. It happened to me well before I became an adult. Um, and it's destroyed parts of my body, and it's changed the trajectory of my life permanently. And it is not of any benefit to children to perform any of this. It's, in fact, it's more dangerous the younger you go, when they're pubescent or prepubescent. These treatments take an even bigger toll
Well,
on the developing body.
you're a model example of what they are doing and what they have in mind for people. They want to, in your case, start young with the medical stuff, the prescriptions and the chemicals, and they pile them on as often as they can get, and then they get you into surgery. So that's what they have in mind for thousands of people, of victims. Uh, since you have denounced your trans status, has anyone, and you become a detransitioner, is that the right term?
Yes.
Detransitioner. You become the most famous detransitioner in the country. I know there's others that have come forward since you have taken your path, and God bless you for that. We wouldn't have any knowledge of how horrible it is unless someone came forward and said, this is really what's happened to me. And even though you're the first one, there are now some few others who have followed in your footsteps thanks to you coming out in the first place. Have
And that
any
was
of
one of my
your,
hopes.
yes, you are doing it. Has anyone, teachers, counselors, doctors, all these people that were very happy to collect a paycheck, collect a fee, get a referral, have any of them offered you apologies or regrets or perspective for getting it wrong with you? I mean, because you're their patient, and if the patient gets it, if they get it right, they go, hey, you were cured. We did it. But when they're not doing it, they should also come forward. When they're, they're prepared, doctors are prepared to give you bad news and good news. Has anyone said, hey, I messed up, hey, we messed up?
Nobody wanted to admit they were wrong. I mean, I went back to all of the psychologists and doctors who were involved in my transition. Um, I spoke to my gender specialist. She tried to justify it as just being another part of my gender journey, whatever that's supposed to mean. My endocrinologist didn't help me to get proper blood testing and any guidelines of how I should go off these treatments, or whether I might need to have supplementary hormones after the facts. My surgeon, when I came back to him to report that I regretted it, and also that I was having complications with the wounds on my chest, all I could really manage to get with him was a 5-minute Zoom call to start with, before he would see me in person. But the response he gave me has made it so that I haven't been able to trust that he would even help me. Because I told him that the skin grafts that they created as part of the mastectomy, have started to weep fluid, and that I have to bandage my chest every day because of it. I wanted to know what it was, what it could be, and how I could treat it. And he kind of just beat around the bush. He didn't really address any of my concerns, and he told me, well, just use some Vaseline on it, and that'll help it heal. He treated it as if it was a normal thing that he's seen happen to other patients. And with how nonchalant he was about it, that was my assumption, and that I should take his advice, because even though it didn't make sense to me at the time to put Vaseline on a wound that is already weeping fluid, I took it, and it gave me a skin infection. The wound weeped about thrice the amount of fluid and leaked through the bandage through my shirt. And that was the moment that really hit the nail on the head. That really put the final nail in the coffin, because I've just found it extremely difficult to go back to any of my doctors since. They won't admit they're wrong. They won't even help me.
Well, what the horrifying part of this is that these people are supposed to be helping you and repairing you and putting you whole and putting you on the right path for physical and mental health. And there's a whole industry to essentially mutilate you and not even be able to repair you when you want to stop the mutilation. Right now, you're explaining how you're suffering today from the affirmation medical treatments you receive. Uh, I mean, it's a horrific experience that you're describing that is ongoing. Would that be true? Is that a true statement?
It's pretty accurate. Um, I mean, the longer I've been off of the testosterone, um, the better my health has been getting. But I still have issues with my urinary tract every now and then. Um, and I mean, the effects to my appearance, for example, have been permanent, like to my bone structure, the shape of my face and body. And it is kind of hard to grapple with the fact that my body has been permanently masculinized visually, and that I'll never be able to get back what I had. That entire organs have been ripped away from me permanently. But I
They've
mean, I
been
think I get better
altered.
every day.
You basically were put through an altering process, not knowing that it was such going to be permanent. It was considered to be, quote, a transition. And what it was beyond mutilation, the mutilization, being mutilized, taking the drugs, changing things at that critical moment of when you're supposed to be growing normally, but to take that growth and alter that growth pattern makes it a permanent condition. So you are in a permanent condition of understanding and knowing what you're kind of like a big experiment with these
Right.
people.
I mean,
They
I was,
experimented on you.
I mean, that's absolutely what it was. I was just one big experiment, I feel like. But I mean, I was told um, during the
Without your
consultations
permission. I might add
for
this
this
without
treatment,
your
for this course of treatment,
if they
that it
told you
would
that yeah, if they
that it would
told
be
you that you were
permanent.
going to be permanently marred forever from any potential for being a woman, they didn't. That's not how they phrased it.
I mean, they did say that parts of the treatment, like the mastectomy and certain effects from the testosterone, would be permanent. But when you're at an age where you haven't lived very many years in the world, where you have so little experience with it, how are you supposed to know what permanence means?
Well, from my perspective, I don't think you would know at age 15 or 16 what permanent means because you just.
I wouldn't have.
I've learned a lot in just 5 minutes with you to know that I have had misconceptions. You know, I thought, oh, puberty blockers don't have this permanent impact. Well, they do. Where have I heard it? I have just gotten your testimony. Puberty blockers and testosterone treatments and estrogen and so on. All that stuff is not on permanent, unbelievable supply. If you cut it off or you add to it, you change your structure. I've just learned that from you. I didn't know that. So, I mean, part of that is adults. Should there be laws? Should the adults be passing laws? This is what Marjorie Taylor Greene is hoping to do. Would your life have been better had there been laws that prevented your affirming treatment until you were 18 years old? I mean, wouldn't that have saved a little bit of this? Until you were 18? How old are you now?
I'm 18, yeah.
You're 18 now. Would it been, should there be laws stopping this until young people are 18 years old?
I mean, it shouldn't even be an option for children under the age of 18. I think that it should be illegal to perform these surgeries or this course of treatment on anybody before they hit 18. But even then, it's not like once you hit 18, you magically have all this experience and maturity. Because, I mean, I don't think this is an appropriate course of treatment for most people under the age of 25 even, because it is very much permanent, and it takes a lot of experience and knowledge of and within the world, some experience in life, to be able to determine whether you might want to go down this path, because it could potentially take away your ability to have children, and it will affect pretty much every single part of your physical and psychological health. And it's a lot to expect of anybody under the age of 18, or even somebody who hasn't hit their mid-20s yet.
Well, they do put off drinking alcohol until age 21.
Right.
So they've done that, and I would agree that this is such radical. It does have a profound impact on the individual beyond their capacity to understand. What would you say was the primary lie? Because I've heard about the promotions, I've heard about the coaxing, I've heard about the warnings, but what was a lie that made everything go wrong? What was the lie that you were able to figure out the truth during this whole course of treatment? The treatment.
I mean, I think the biggest lie was the entire premise of it, that I could become a boy by lopping off parts of my body and taking some magical medication, because no matter what I did to my body, I would still be biological female, just with less of myself. And I learned that the hard way.
What would you encourage people to do? We've talked about the legislation making it illegal for people under the age of 18. Presently, that's what's being proposed. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, has got a bill to basically eliminate all surgery. There are other people with limited application of the same principle. They would outlaw it. She would do it under the age of 18. There are other people who would have introduced legislation to make it not available for children at 10 years old and 11 years old and 12 years old. So there's a direction to sponsor that legislation in the states. I believe a number of states have passed that legislation, and it is illegal in those states. And their laws are being upheld in the states as well. But what else besides legislation? Do you have any ideas regarding things besides legislation?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important that we address this through legislation and make it illegal to do this to children. But it's also important that we address this societally, that we get the word out to other people within our community, that this is happening to children, that boys and girls and young men and women are victim to this, that this shouldn't be happening to kids. And most importantly, to have compassion for the people who are being affected by this, who either are struggling with gender dysphoria, who want to be the opposite sex and are going through this rigorous course of treatment, and those who already have been harmed by it and want to detransition.
It's a serious mutilation that occurred in your case, and it's based on a lie that one can simply change their sex, their gender, which isn't true. So I am aware of this horrific experience that you've had, and want to thank you for your witness. You're an extremely brave woman, as I've said earlier, and you've been helping to protect children's innocence. And I feel that while it's a horrific experience that we have to talk about, what you've done for Congress, Senate, the White House, if we were ever to regain the White House, is that you've come forward and you've provided a understanding and an illumination, an expose of what has happened to you, and you put yourself in the limelight. And I want to repeat your website again for those who are following you on Twitter. I would like to add at Chu Cole, CHOOOCOLE. It's on Twitter. And of course, we're following you with notifications on. And we know we'll hear from you again very soon. And of course, we'll promote and retweet your messages on Twitter and our social media as well. Thank you again for helping the world, being a guide in the darkness of all the confusion that you have faced and that you have been coming through. God bless you.
Thank you, sir.